And of course we have Rob, who is also more recently working on it, and he says Greater Khorasan to be Inner Khorasan, which some people also call Little Tocharistan and Transoxiana. So there's different, we have agreement on that, that's good. So this is one way of looking at Khorasan. This is sort of static definition. And here you have just a map of Lestrange. You see here province of Khorasan, nice boundaries, Kurdistan and Sajistan in the south. There is another way of thinking about it though, so this is the dynamic definition as I call it, which is saying, okay, but the boundaries have changed over time. It's been 1,000, 1,500 years, of course, over time it's going to change. And of course you two both look at during the period of Islamic conquests, and that's the period you're looking at. And I think probably the textbook definition of this is Bosworth in Encyclopedia of Islam, where he calls it, and I'll quote, "In pre-Islamic and early Islamic times, the term Khorasan frequently had a much wider denotation, covering also parts of what are now Soviet Central Asia and Afghanistan. Early Islamic usage often regarded everywhere east of Western Persia, Jabal, or what was consequently termed Aragh-e-Ajami, as being included in a vast and ill-defined region of Khorasan, which might even extend to the Indus Valley and Sand. Thus the Armenian geography, etc., and he says the boundaries." So he says actually it's a pretty wide area, we don't really know where it is, we have some sense. And then Lambden and others say, okay, over time it has come to be a more precisely defined region. And Lambden, she says, okay, well, early Muslim times it was Khorasan and Transoxiana, Sajistan and Kurdistan, and then after the Seljuks, it became until the Oxus, and it still had some borderlands beyond it, so it shrinks over time. And then we have Persian scholars working in Iran in 2018, similar concept reviewing the Islamic literature. And here's an example. You have Khorasan on the left, the bigger, more ill-defined, and then in Ghaznavids, and then in the Seljuks, getting there. And then even smaller and around the late 12th century. Okay, we also have the opposite though. Some people say it was originally smaller and it got larger. And so some people say actually there was an original nucleus. This is Ronte in this edited volume here. And it actually started in this red area, which is sort of Khorasan proper, the Marvoisis, Herat, Suzan, and the eastern border all the way to Gorgan. But then during the Islamic period it expanded, includes Balkh, Transoxiana, Hyrcania, etc. So that's the modern literature. I won't go too much into detail into the Islamic literature because I think you guys know a lot of it. But we've sort of divided into the two different schools, how they were thinking about it in previous times. So we have the Iraqi school, which, as you can tell, didn't have a fondness for borders. And so they were mapping, basically, this is from ibn-Khurad.bih, the road maps of roads in kingdom. And they, it's okay? And they look at the way, the routes to get to different places, right? And so they're not so much concerned with making Khorasan as a fixed area, but how to get from different places. And these are the different areas that they look at, including Yaqubi and Ibn Rusta. Then the Hudud al-Alam, which is of anonymous authorship, they do sort of draw boundaries over the main cities of the Sharha, and then he expands the boundaries of Hudud of Khorasan, and we have, Reza has drawn very nice maps here of them. And so they're sort of saying, again, similar to our definitions, dynamic, maybe it grows bigger, but they have pretty much a sense of where it is. But I'll stop here to let Reza now tell us what the evidence is. So I've created this problem, and now Reza's going to solve it for us. So I'll hand it over.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think we already heard a lot. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, so we already heard a lot about the statistical and dynamic way of looking at Khorasan, which is very important to understand basically what the scholarship talks about. But before I actually say something, I should acknowledge that what I'm going to say, all of it is not mine. Many of these ideas are coming from very established scholars, including Professor Khoushayati and Professor Howard and also some other colleagues. So if some ideas come there, basically I try to get them and try to build upon them. This is exactly what we do in scholarship, and of course, blend and critical. So, so what we heard basically about that, we said about Khorasan, but maybe the question comes to your mind is that where this name comes from? why so problematic in different maps are different. Many people try to explain it, they can't explain where it is basically. So I'm trying to get a little bit closer to the sources, and then although these are not all sources, I try to be very selective to put some at least ideas to see where this idea comes and how and when it becomes basically a political region, and eventually it comes to all those geographical accounts that Hannah talked about, the Stakhri and Udulalem and Muqaddasi and others. So we have to, again, I'm a long durée person, so I go back again, I'm basically Pushayati's student, so I go back to all time as long as possible to see what's happening. So what you really get in the community period, so this is a standard, not a standard, but as a map, a lot use this one, and it has basically a place called Bakhtri and then Surto, and basically you have Marv. So Marv, Sort and Bactria, you have it basically, they're separate regions, and then this is what we basically get about the boundaries of this region. Usually Bakhtri or Bactri is ended on the Oxus River or the Amu Darya, the Itya, and the Darya here. But actually we have some evidences from Balkh itself, from the Achaemenid period that some of you are already aware of, and these are the Aramaic documents come from Balkh. It's written basically by the governor of Balkh called Akhwa Mazda to Bagawat, or Bagawant, the ruler of Khulmi, which is also near Balkh. And it talks about building a wall in Nakhshapaya. So in Nakhshapaya basically comes in these maps in Sokhdiana, which actually Nakhshap or Nashab or Nasaf later. So we understand that the Bakhtri of the basically Achaemenid was like a little bit including on the other side of the Amu Darya. So this was basically Bakhtri, and then Bakhtri comes from the prototype Bakhtian, Bakhvi. That you have it also in Avesta and others, and that's the source of all Eastern and Western languages talks about this region. But what we actually get is that in the Achaemenid period we have 3 different regions with their names we have. So not yet unified politically in that sense. And then we also know that what happens after is the Greeks come, Greek or Macedonian, they will come here, and then what they do, they rule basically all this region, they expand later, and we have the coins of at least Dimitri and Diodotus here, the gold deity, and then the Dimitri's actually the conquest or the conqueror of this region, basically India, you can say. So what they did, the core area was Bactria, and then or Bactriani, which you actually have in the Greco-Roman writings later. So then what we get is basically there are 3 regions separate: Sokhdiana, Marv, and Bakhtri, and Arya or Herat basically were all different. So not yet Khorasan at all. And then what we get later, we have the basically the nomadic pastoralist people. We call them the USG people. They come from North China, Gansu province, this area. They eventually come to this region, and then what they do, they continue what the Greco-Bactrians did. They go to India, they expand, and then they unify basically this part, the Hindu Kush mountain, with the plains of northern India. They unify them under one political group in one empire. And what they do, they basically rule this area, and then for the first time we see they actually give a new name to this region. It's called Tukharistan, and then this is Tukharistan. Later we hear a lot in the Arabic sources. Basically the origin, the root is this one, and then why? Because these are the Tukhari people, and then Tukhari people stay here, so that's the region is called Tukharistan. Like we say, this is Istanistan, that we all know, the place, and then the Tukhari, and then we actually, I put some coins for you, particularly Kanishka here. That what happens is this region, which was Bakhtri, it becomes Tukharistan, but I believe mostly it's eastern part of it, basically, not the entire region. And then we have evidences that you can see that we have an inscription of Rabatak, basically ordered by Kanishka, the king of Kushans, and he actually talks about the change of the language, and also we have 2 documents from the 5th century. And then this one is from the 2nd century probably, and which is basically talks about Tukharistan. So for the first time, on the evidence, what we see that basically the Nukunzuk, one of the commanders in this region, basically talks about Tukharistan, says when Kanishka comes from India to Tukharistan, it does not say Bactria. And then, and also we have this inscription that he says that, by the order of the king, the Greek language was basically changed into Bakhtri, basically Arya, and then, that we call it Bactrian today because we have it from this region. So Bactrian is not the name of the language, but we call it for convention, we understand it today. And then we have basically these evidences, so it talks about the George of Tukharistan and Garchistan, or Garchistan, and then that's basically mountain area. Gar means mountain, or Gar. And then, so what you get so you get the name. So what happens, from the Achaemenid, then the Greco-Bactrian, then the Kushans, you get a new name for this region, and then Tukharistan. And that is actually what you get in the Chinese sources called Tubulu, or the Tukhari people, basically. You get it later, even in the 6th and 7th century. Then the other things which is very interesting is happening about the name and this region, changes basically. You have the Sasanians. So, all the Farataraka people are here. So the Sasanians go up, expand, the two sides. With the Romans, they defeat the Roman, Valerianus. And then you also have that the Kushan, basically the Sasanians move to the Kushan area. They conquer that area. It's not a new idea. Conquer that area. And then we have the evidence basically shows that, the king of the Kushan was already, king of Sasanians were already there. The Kushan probably, local lords, they're receiving him, giving him the arrow and other things. So what they do, for the first time, here, the Sasanians call it Kushan Shah. And then we have the evidence basically from the Kabe Zartusht, the inscription when Shahpur says Shahanshah, basically Shahanshah Iran and Iran, who is basically the Iran Shah Khawadai, who is the lord of Iran Shah. What he says basically, the armies, they go and get the Kushan Shah, Ta Farazi Peshawar, or basically, and then if you look at it, so this area, which was Bactria and Tukharistan, all the way to, this area, which is mostly this area, the Peshawar, so they take it, but then what happens is the domain in the northern part of the Hindu Kush, which is basically the Kushan area, they call it the Kushan Shah. So, no name first, Bactri, Sogdi, and others, then you have basically what? Tukharistan, and you have Kushan Shah, which is Kushan Shah, part of also, the domain of Iran Shah, in a way, it comes, and then, go back, and then, so what happens is that the Kushano-Sasanians rule this area as the Kushan Shah. So basically the king of the Kushan, and then we have the coins of at least Hormuz and Piruz II. So you can clearly, they call themselves, the Kushan Shah. But interestingly, they write, that in Bactrian, and of course, in Persian, because in a way, whoever comes to this region usually means coins in different languages. So that's something different we can talk about. Go back, go, yeah, exactly. So it's fine. And then, so what happens later, that the Honish people, because of the climate change in the Altai region, they come to this region, they take basically the Kushan Shah, and then when they remain here, they rule basically, under the title of Yabgu of the Haftals. And then these basically, the Honish people, when they come here, they're part of a big migration, wave. They go to this area, they go to the south, and they go this way. Some part of them, come to this way, to say the northern part of Hindu Kush, Sogdiana and Bactria. And then they create a large empire called the Haftarite. And some of these people actually move to the south. And that is the interesting thing that happens. You can go there and then make it. And then what happens is the people actually go to the south and remain and try to, or say, rule this area, which is large part of, say Peshawar, this area all the way to Kabul, south of the Hindu Kush. Then you see on their coins, which we call them the Al-Khan, basically, they themselves call themselves the Al-Khan, usually in Bactrian Brahmi, say, scripts. And then, if you look at from the Khingil, the king, all Mihirakula, all the way, to Aduman, then you suddenly get a very interesting title. It says, Aduman, king of the east. And then say Aduman, basically Khurasan, basically Mirasan Shah. This is Mirasan Shah Aduman. So for the first time, see, some people in South of Hindu Kush, they claim that they are king of the east. So east comes, as a region, but we don't know what is the west of it and who are the west of it. Mostly Sasanian, but then we don't know, how they define. And Khurarat has written basically an article on this called From Mirasan to Khorasan, which is very interesting. He argues that the Sasanian basically got Khorasan from them. And then the important to say is that Mirasan is basically was there in the Bactrian documents, but was actually just a geographical indicator for lands, not yet an idea, a realm to rule it. And then go back, and then. So then what happens is that for the first time as Khorasan, becomes as a region, political region with administrative or an administrative unit, it happens under the Sasanians, not the beginning because it was Kushan Shah, but after the Reformation. And then the question is because they had basically war with the Haftalites, and then Piruz was killed, and then you know all about it. And this Reformation in a way is a response to the nomadic people coming from the northeast mostly. And then I'm not going through these basically say details. So what you get you basically get something called Kusti Khavarasan. And then most probably, this is happening while Mirasan was still there. So it's in a way, the Sasanian in a way responds, to what they get in this region, because at the same time also we know that they have the Kalarang, Marsbon is the same, meaning Khavarasan and the Mirasan. So you get basically this, and then for the first time you see this administrative, basically region. You have a Spapat that's from Nimruz. Sorry, it was not. I didn't have the picture from Khorasan. But then you get basically a Spapat and the Marzban, as I talked last time about it. So what you get is Marzban is also in a kind of, bringing the East into kind of, Sasanian administration and rebranded. So that's why you have Marzban only in this region and not in the western part of the Sasanian Empire. So then what you get is basically you get Khurasan as a unit, administrative unit, but there are lots of questions we can ask about it later. And then what happens is the Arabs, as Harwani already explained, that the Arabs were part of the Iranian, trade center, the part of the Iranian and Byzantine world, basically. So what they did is they already knew about these, routes and say the places, yes. So they already knew Khurasan. So what they do, they go basically to Khurasan and then they conquer it. And then for the first time, what they do, they unify all these regions and they create their Umayyad province of Khurasan. So this Umayyad province of Khurasan, from Qumis to Sirdarya, almost with 4 big cities, or 4 arba, basically, we can look at it. So if you look at the administrative side, it's very much looking like the same one. Very much, not like really, that much difference. And then, we go. And then, so what you basically get it, this is quite interesting, that at the same time, when the Arabs, the Umayyads making their Khurasan, there is someone else also claiming to be the king of Khurasan. And these people are in the south, in Kabul area. So you have the very famous, Tegin Khurasan Shah, on his coin, basically, says that he is king of Khurasan. And then, not only that, but you get a back-chain document actually talks about Mirzaini, basically is from Khesh here, between Bamiyan and Kabul. So somebody here, he says that I'm lord of this place, but under the jurisdiction or under basic authorship or say overlordship of the Prince of Khurasan. So that's quite interesting. So you have a Khurasan here, and you have an Arab, Umayyad, province of Khurasan, because you have the coin of Asad al-Qasri minted in Bal, and also Amir of Khurasan. I'm finishing it. And then, so if you go to the last one. And then, so what you get it is Khurasan becomes basically a unit, administrative, geographical, political, and then of course for the Umayyads, as Rob already wrote a lot about in his book, is a frontier, in a way. And then, so what happens, we know with the Abbasids, they come back to the west, and that's the time that the Khurasani identity, becomes basically or establishes in the Islamic world. Mostly when these families come there. For example, one of them is Barmakids. The coins come from Egypt all the way, basically Central Asia. This one is Fazl, and then Muhammad bin Barmak and all these people, in Sindh. So that basically they're trying to establish. I'm finishing it. And then, so basically what happens is the Khurasan she talked about, as in terms of dynamic and aesthetics, changing, and all those scholarship talk about it, is mostly roots in this, period. And why? Because you see basically when the Abbasids are there, so you have the Tahirids, you have the Samanids. So basically the Tahirids, have the authority of this region, and then the Samanids and the Tahirids basically in a way divided into 2 parts, so Mawara al-Nar and Khurasan. For the first time, apparently Mawara al-Nar comes in the 9th century. So we don't have it, earlier than that. And then, so later the final division happens when the Qarakhalid and the Ghaznavids basically divide these 2 territories, makes it Mawara al-Nar and Khurasan. And this is what you get later in all sources. So one of the roots of this, confusion of why it's moving so much is because of lots of political things is happening. So that's why it shifts all the time. Yeah.
Okay, and then just the last.
Well, this is you can say.
Yeah. So just the last point is, where is it really? And we thought the best way is to say follow the Saffron Trail. So this is a map of arable land in the region. So the green is irrigated by the rivers, and yellow is rainfall. And so you can see this is pretty much exactly Khorasan as we think of it.
So wherever you see melon and saffron.
Melon and saffron together. Okay, thank you very much.
Maybe let's take a moment if somebody has 1 or 2 short questions. Let's start with Henry there.
Can you tell me which Chinese source you have mentioned for Toharistan?
Yeah, Xuanzang. Yeah, 2 Bulu. So see, Da Tanashi Yuji. The book is translated by Samuel Bell, 1903.
That's the prize for the shortest question, shortest answer of the conference. Do we have another short question?
Short.
I don't believe you.
First of all, excellent. Thank you for giving us the prehistory of Khorasan. I'm so excited by this. So that's great. Please follow your uncle's footsteps. Okay, don't go to modern stuff. What is Mirasan?
Oh, Mirasan.
What is Mir?
Mir means sun.
Mir.
So,
That's why Mir Zaini was the name of Mir Zaini.
Mir as in Mir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's why.
don't
یکیه
Bye.
این خورشیده
Bye.
هم خور این مترادفه میرسن باشه خورسن باشه فرقی نداره
بله.
همشون یکیه
بله درسته و منظورم اینه که میر میتراه
این هم خراسان هم این اصطلاح مردمیه نه نه سیاسی جایی که آفتاب در میاد
The place where the sun rises, yes.
All right, well, let's thank Reza and Howard. Our next presentation is going to be by Forsiyzabon, who is a graduate assistant, an MA from TDSHU University. He's an architectural historian, the author of the book Architectural Mentalities in Persian Texts, Eastern Iranian World of the Early Islamic Centuries. And at the present, he is a graduate assistant in the Dome project, particularly a project entitled Architectural Technology Transfer on the Silk Roads, Iranian Double-Shell Domes and the West. This is a project funded by Marie Skłodowska-Gume. So, take it away, Farzad.
Thank you.
Okay. Shall I use the microphone or not? Yeah? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm very glad to be here today. I truly want to thank Rob for all his efforts for this conference. I would like to present an idea about the possible influence of theological currents on architectural mentality in early Islamic centuries in Eastern Iranian world. In the literature on architectural history, we encounter a term, Islamic architecture. This term distinguishes the architecture of antiquity from that of the Islamic period and considers Islam, or the culture that emerged from it, as a driving force behind the transition from former to the latter. A comparison of prominent surviving buildings from these two periods reveals differences in proportions, design, ornamentations, material, construction technique, and even function. If we accept the challenging and controversial term of Islamic architecture as valid and believe that Islam in some way contributed to emergence of new architecture and art, then how exactly did this influence take place? During the same centuries that architecture was evolving, Muslims were entering new land, encountered unfamiliar idea, and felt the need to defend or articulate Islamic teaching intellectually. This need gave rise to ilm al-kalam, or Islamic theology. Mutakallim across the Islamic world began to engage with a range of concepts and questions related to God, and as you can see on the board, and began to engage with develop categories for understanding existence, the divine will, causality, and agency. As Yusuf van Es noted, society at large interprets its reality through the lens of kalam and listen closely to the mutakallims. According to Ghazali and Meghrizi, ilm kalam had become highly widespread and widely accepted to the extent that it could neither be ignored or opposed. This raised an important question for me as an architectural historian. It is possible that ilm kalam and its debates also shape people's attitude toward architecture, altering the way they thought and spoke about architecture. Could the discourse of kalam have transformed architectural hope, fear, idea, and ways of thinking? If so, it would be a valuable achievement for architectural historians, for we would have finally found a way to demonstrate how Islam, through a specific mechanism, gave rise to Islamic architecture and a new architectural tradition. To explore this question, I examined around 30 Persian sources which were composed or translated in Eastern Iranian world between the rise of Abbasid and the fall of Seljuk. It is important to note that none of the written sources within this scope are specialized architectural texts, and architecture has never references to architecture and buildings appeared only incidentally when it was a necessity to mention the location of an event. Therefore, due to the nature of the sources and the scarcity of the relevant evidence, this research has to bring together scattered pieces of information from various sources in order to construct a kind of collage, an assembled image that may represent the architectural mentality. I present my finding into two parts. First, on the role of God in architectural mentality, and second, on the similarity of architectural mentality with ideas and perspectives of Ash'arite schools. Due to the time limitation, I'll offer just a single example for each theme of architectural mentality and leave out further supporting evidence. These resources consistently emphasize God's active role in architecture. Let's ask questions and let architectural mentality answer them. For example, who writes the buildings? Or who can erect the structure? The sources do not portray architecture as solely human-made. Rather, it is believed that God brought forth cities, palaces, and dwellings even before the creation of humankind. Architectural creation is not limited to Earth either. Structures such as bridges, tents, and palaces exist in paradise and are attributed to God. How was the first structure on Earth created, for example? Bayt al-Ma'mur or Kaaba is considered the first structure ever created on Earth. Bal'ami and Asadi Tusi emphasize that Kaaba was built by God, who was even involved in the detail of Kaaba's construction, determining both its location and the material with which it should be built. As you can see here. Which factor contributed to the construction and destruction of building? Indeed, here we have the role of God. It was believed that God played an active role in the construction of certain building on earth. God sometimes taught his servant how to erect the structure for the very first time, sometimes grant them divine knowledge or demarcating the boundaries of the building through winds, angel, and other supernatural means. God could preserve building from calamity, as seen in the story of Kaaba during Nuh floods. He could also destroy buildings. References are made to the shaking and breaking apart of Nimrud's and Kekavus palaces, the destruction of the fortress and mansion of Haran, the flooding that devastating fields and houses, as well as earthquakes and the destruction of fortification. All attribute to God's will. How they think about lands? Let's explore this. We know that every building must be built on land. Land was seen as God's possession. Bal'ami uses the phrase, the land of God, and through the voices of various characters reveal this relation. What is their attitude towards dwellings and buildings? Human dwellings include tent, pavilion, garden, and houses were seen as divine's blessing. What is their attitude toward builders? Builders of sacred structure had to meet a spiritual condition. They must believe in God, the last day, and maintain religious obligation. Not everyone was deemed worthy to build a mosque. What is their attitude toward time of construction even? Even the time had kind of divine significance. For example, Maqdisi says that Sunday is preferred for beginning construction. But why? Because God started creating heaven on that day. In what way was the act of architecture evaluated? The authors of the sources sometimes praise architecture and at other times condemn it. Interestingly, praise or condemnation of architecture also invoke some kind of divine criteria. Some authors praise it as a God-given duty which brings them sawab or reward. Others condemn it for distracting believers from hereafter, leading to heedlessness. In what ways were the buildings categorized? architecture was classified as either pure or impure. The pure category was associated with God and answered prayers, and the impure with tyrants, demons, and wicked. Overall, the sources reflect a strong belief in a connection between different aspects, you can see on the board, and God. Some have echoing concerns similar to the concerns of Mutakallim, echoing the concerns of early Mutakallim, some have. And I would like to say, suggesting a theological worldview behind themselves. That's why I want to argue that based on the findings that I present to you and lots of other supporting evidence, there is a strong relation between Islamic theology or Ilm Kalam and architectural mentalities. Absolutely, it needs deeper investigation, but in this stage, if we accept the argument, the next question is that, can we trace this mentality to a specific Kalam school? Though I'm not a specialist in this field, I recognize the complexity of Kalam and the fluidity of his school. Still, I propose reducing the main early schools to two broad currents, Mu'tazila and Ash'ari, for the sake of preliminary comparison. One thing for comparison is astrology. The belief in celestial influence on human destiny predates Islam, we know that. Mu'tazila, such important and prominent figure of Mu'tazila school such Abul Hazir, opposite such idea for promoting determinism. Meanwhile, the author explicitly spoke of the definite influence of position of celestial body on the prosperity of settlement, the stability of the building, and even the lives of those who inhabit them. There are numerous accounts indicating that attention was paid to the position of a star in both minor and major architectural undertakings. These beliefs resonate more with traditional and Ash'ari attitude than with Mu'tazila rationalism. Belief in supernatural phenomena is another dividing line. Most Mu'tazilites, such as Nazzam or Qazi Abdul Jabbar, rejected the real existence of jinn, angels, magic, miracles outside prophetic context. In contrast, in fact, their fears such belief would undermine the uniqueness of prophetic truths. By contrast, the Ash'ari accepted such possibility. For example, Shibli Nu'mani noted that Ash'aris believe in magic and miracle beyond prophets. And scholars and mutakallims such as Baghlani even classified some type of magic. At the very least, one can say that if such phenomena were attributed to the divine will, they were generally acceptable with Ash'ari thought. The authors believe in supernatural forces and their influence on architecture. It is frequently reported that kings and prophets enlisted the service of jinn to excavate mines and graves, or to construct mosques, cities, or fortification. According to the author, supernatural forces affect architectural work. As far as we know, talismans were used to make a building impenetrable, to cause a structure to appear or disappear, or to prevent even the entry of insects and scorpions. We even have a narration from Hujviri in which a servant with a mere gesture of a hand transformed all the stone and rubble of a ruined wall into gold. It is explained that if a servant of a god is obedient, the entire universe becomes obedient to that servant. This belief aligned closely with the Ash'ari belief, reflecting God's control over all acts. The glorification of inanimate object is another thing. The Quran states that inanimate object or jamadat also glorify God. The Mu'tazilites interpret these verses metaphorically, considering the figurative meaning as valid. In contrast, the Ash'ari attribute literal meaning to these verses and believe that inanimate objects are sentient beings that recognize their creator. Rumi illustrates the contrast between Mu'tazilites and Ash'ari on these matters in these verses, as you can see on the board. According to some authors, the components and elements of buildings, their materials such as stone, rubble, door and walls, door rings, battlements and palaces engage in sama, glorifying God, and even greet the Prophet. Similar to the story of pillars explained by Mustamli Bukhari or Hujviri, these elements contemplate their own resurrection. Even cities have a resurrection, as Narshakhi described. Such views align with Ash'ari metaphysics, not Mu'tazila skepticism. Perhaps the most defining Ash'ari doctrine which the Mu'tazilites reject is Kasb. The God is sole creator of human action, and human only acquire them. Nothing happens without God's will. Many texts show this mentality applied to architecture. Some narration explicitly mention God's intervention in Architecture Act and the absolute dominance of God's will over human will. For example, a people may exert all their effort to demolish a dam, but the dam will not be destroyed until God wills it. Similarly, when a ruler desired to destroy a building, others told him he cannot, because God does not allow anyone to dominate this house, and whoever wishes to destruction of this city will be punished. Sometimes matters related to architecture were entirely entrusted to God, and human action was considered ineffective. For example, when Abraha intended to destroy the Kaaba, the elder of Mecca, Abdul Muttalib, filled the city and said, "This is the house of God, and he is stronger than us. If he wills, he will repel Abraha's harm from this house. And if he grants Abraha dominion, we can do nothing." In architectural action and related matters, the will of God was considered fundamental, and vows and prayers were regarded as a means to attract God's will. Sometimes they hoped that a well by vowing would reach water and bring prosperity. At the other times, they made vows to prevent damage to a building, and occasionally they prayed for the destruction of the city. Even uttering that fulfillment of affairs depends on God's will was crucial, and failing to say it affect the outcome of architectural endeavors. For example, in the story of Alexander breaching the dam, the people of Gog and Magog, or Ya'juj and Ma'juj, could not break the dam until they uttered the phrase Inshallah. Only when one of them spoke this phrase did the dam open. The same event repeated exactly for the owners of a garden. Some authors believe buildings have preordinate destiny that human cannot alter. The emergence of cities like Wasit or Baghdad is foretold in sacred texts. Protection of city may rest on its fated future role. All of this implies a strong belief in divine decree as fundamental in architectural affairs. Thus, we see mentalities that affirm the influence of heavens or stars in the sky, believe in supranational intervention, attribute sentience to building elements, and treat God's will as a foundational in construction. I think these aligns far more with Ash'ari thought than with Mu'tazilite thought. While not a direct transmission, the parallel in my view are strong enough to suggest influence. In this lecture, I aim to highlight the centrality of God in early Islamic architectural mentality and to show thematic parallel with the discourse of Ilm Kalam. By identifying points of resonance, especially with Ash'ari doctrine, I hope to open a conversation about how Islamic theology may have influenced architectural mentality in Eastern Iranian world. I conclude by asking on scholars of theology and Kalam to collaborate with architectural historians to first of all evaluate this idea and then explore this potential relationship more deeply. Thank you for your attention.
Very, very interesting, Farzad. Do we have one or two brief questions about that presentation? Before we move on to the final paper. I see a hand in the back. Anyone? Well, maybe I'll ask a quick one. because I think it's interesting to think about, astrology came up a lot in the talk. And we know that, astrology and building go together far beyond the Islamic world.
Yeah.
So how do we connect this to an issue of ilm specifically? When I'm thinking, for example, the foundation of Baghdad, when Al-Mansur brings also a Zoroastrian and a Jewish astrologer together to make sure he's got all his bases covered, right? That and some of these examples that are going back into the Sasanian era too, that are looking at a position that goes much broader than Islam.
I mentioned your point in my presentation, and I see this in this way, that we have lots of mentalities in our pre-modern texts that is about relationship between architecture and God. Okay? So I think that people in this region cannot think about architecture without thinking about God. There was a strong relationship. So if we accept this premise, the next question is that which schools? I want by raising this point, I want to say that I think Mu'tazila current cannot affect architectural mentality. In contrast, Ash'ari have a big influence on how people think about architecture.
And can you think of a specific monument example you can give us that would really bring that point home?
Using astrological
or the Ash'arite mentality.
One point is that when we think about the relationship between theology and mentality with the physical building, these two cannot be directly connected to each other. We pursue that when we want to, when we think about architectural mentality, we talk about the human, a person who has desire, fears, hopes, and by this desire and hopes, he creates something. Okay, the relation between these two is not so straight, and I think it's not a correct question to expect that a building was purely and physically be related to Ash'ari thought.
It's kind of there in the
yeah.
Great. I think maybe we'll have, or we have a question.
Overall, excuse me. I appreciate your research and I like the idea, but I was just wondering, as I noticed, almost as I remember, all of the texts you referred to were from Islamic historians, not the theologians. I see what you mean. I see what you mean. We can see the kind of theological thought behind those, assertions.
Mm-hmm.
But since you exactly in your title you have ilmi kalam, I thought maybe it would be nice if you could look into the actual theologian texts as well.
Yeah, that's really a good point. Actually, I'm not a specialist in this field, and I just try to dig out in this. And I want to say that your point is right, that maybe most of the sources are related to the Islam and mutakallams, or their view are close to the mutakallams. But remember that, for example, sources such as Tarjumi Tafsir Tabari or Hujviri or Asrar al-Tawhid, in my point of view, had a huge influence on its society. So if they talk about something like that about architecture, maybe this sentence and have changed the idea and attitude of people. And I just want to show it up.
Thank you. Maybe we'll have some more questions. Now here we are, the last paper of the last session of the last day. Saving, but definitely not the least, right? I'd like to now welcome Nilofar Hominazad, who is a doctoral researcher at the University of Hamburg. where she's studying for a PhD, and is a part of the project Zoroastrian Scribes and Scribal Practices during the Safavid period. And she'll be speaking today on Zoroastrian resettlement from Khorasan to Yazd and Kerman.
Yeah, but I need that for my PowerPoint.
Well, I'll say while they're setting this up too, that project in Harvard, of course, a really wonderful project working on written artifacts and archives, generally with the Zoroastrian materials, right? Really fantastic project, and happy
Thank
to
you.
put them through this stuff.
Can you see me? No. How can I?
You have to drag it to the other side.
No. Oh, okay, thank you. Right, hello everybody, thank you for being here. Can you hear me? Yes, I do. Before I start, I need to say that due to some unfortunate event, I had to shorten my presentation a bit, so apologies for that in advance. And also, I need to say that my presentation involves too many names and dates. Again, apologies for that. During the last 2 years, while working on my PhD project on Zoroastrian scribe families living in Yazd and Kerman during the Safavid period, I came across an alteration in reproduction that could be a result of Khorasani Zoroastrian immigration to Yazd and Kerman, or could simply be a coincidence. I had to ask 3 main questions. When did this final wave of immigration to Yazd and Kerman happen? Why did it happen, and how did it affect manuscript production in Yazd and Kerman? But before I go any further, I just need to say that what I'm presenting today is pretty much work in progress. That is why I'm look forward to hearing your tips and comments and notes. The process of marginalization of Zoroastrians, especially after the Arab conquest and in the early Islamic centuries, have been told by scholars many times that I'm not talking about today. But we know that to escape oppression and forced conversion to Islam, Zoroastrians became more and more marginalized over time. Until the late 13th century, Khorasan and Sistan were the sources of advice for Zoroastrians in Iran and in India. We know of the first immigrants to India who wanted to establish their consecrated fire of Bahram, and they sent 2 herbats to Khorasan to obtain the necessary equipment for the fire installation, probably around the 9th century. We also know of a Parsi priest called Mahyar Mahmir, who from Ucha in India, who traveled to Sistan and stayed there for 6 years and took back a Videvdat manuscript to India in 1205. We also know of 2 Iranian priests, Rostam Mehraban and Mehraban Keykhosro from Sistan, who traveled to India and copied several manuscripts there from 1278 for more than 50 years. Zoroastrians of Khorasan seem to have been active in manuscript production before the 15th century as well. We know of a certain Rostam who made a copy of the Ardabi Raznamag and Madayani Yushtiferian in 1269, apparently in Yashabur. He shares the name Rostam with the Rostam Mehraban. We don't know if they are the same, but they were living in the same time period. And also in the 13th century, Zoroastrian priests and poets like Keykavus Bahram Pajdu and his son Zardosh Bahram from Khaf in Khorasan composed new Persian religious poetry. Zardosht, for example, versified older Pahlavi texts like a versification of Ardavi Raznamak in 1278. This situation changed, and Sistan and Khorasan began to lose their dominance from the 14th century, and the Zoroastrian population gradually moved to Yazd and Kerman. We don't know when exactly this resettlement happened, but we have some reports about Zoroastrian population in the Persian Riwayat, which is a compilation of letters exchanged between Parsis and Iranian Zoroastrians from 15th to 18th century. In the Riwayat of Nariman Hushang, a Parsi who traveled to Yazd in 1477, there is a mention of Zoroastrian population. 900 Zoroastrians living in Yazd, 700 in Kerman, 2,700 in Sistan, and 1,700 in Khorasan. In another letter, which was sent to India by a certain Kamdin Shapur in 1559, there is a mention of 3,000 Zoroastrians from Khorasan who were living in Kerman. And in a letter in 1596, there are 4,500 Zoroastrians living in Yazd and 500 in Khorasan. And in the riwayat of another Parsi called Esfandiar in 1626, number of Zoroastrians in Yazd is 2,400 and in Khorasan 500. This final reduction of Zoroastrian population of Yazd might have something to do with Shah Abbas' plan to force Zoroastrians to move to Isfahan, but I'm not sure. So we can see from this riwayat that this wave of immigration of Khorasani Zoroastrians, who were mainly priests, must have happened after 1477. But Khorasan had lost its centrality even before the resettlement of its population. When Nariman Hushang traveled to Iran, Sistan and Khorasan had larger number of Zoroastrians, but he chose Yazd to obtain manuscripts and ask theological questions. What happened that these cities like Sistan and Khorasan had lost their dominance despite their population? Fire temples of Khorasan were no longer active after the 10th century, and one of Karpo in Sistan seemed to be working until the 13th century, when it was annihilated during the Mongol invasions. On the contrary, there were consecrated fires, Atash Bahram, and active fire temples in Yazd and Kerman. Knowing the crucial role of fire in Zoroastrianism, in absence of fire temples and subsequently ritual performances and priestly activities, it was probable that these cities would lose their importance. The reason for this immigration may not be clear. We can only assume that due to constant attacks to eastern borders, first by Mongols, then by Uzbeks, they had to move to more distant, marginal regions. In the case of Khorasan, Shiism could also play a role. When Safavids chose Shiism as their official religion, Mashhad, with the shrine of the 8th Shi'i Imam, became more important to the court. So the region was no longer a comfortable place for Zoroastrians to live in. But why all of this matter in my work? The oldest preserved manuscripts, which are also among the oldest manuscripts altogether, were written in India in the 13th and 14th century, several from originals written in Iran. These are the manuscripts copied by the aforementioned Rustam Mehraban and his grandnephew Mehraban Kaykhosro. The oldest dated manuscript is the Visparat manuscript K7A, which was written by Rustam Mehraban at Anklossar in India in 1258. Rustam Mehraban and his grandnephew Mehraban Kaykhosro altogether copied almost 6 or 7 manuscripts in India. They were active there for 50 years. Other 14th century manuscript is the first part of the Vishtas Biasht manuscript G18, which was apparently copied by Khosrow Shah, son of Rustam, in 1327, and Khorda Avesta manuscript JM4, which contains a date of 1352 that can be the date that it was copied. Let's keep in mind that these manuscripts were copied in India and not in Iran. And until the 16th century, we cannot trace more Avestan manuscripts. It is almost parallel to the resettlement of Zoroastrians of Khorasan in Yazdan Kerman that we notice a boost in manuscript production in Yazdan Kerman. As I mentioned earlier, those who moved from Khorasan were mainly priests, and copying manuscripts was mostly done by them. Less is known about the scribal activities of the Zoroastrian clergy and their production of manuscripts before the Safavid period. Now I would like to talk about a priestly family, the Dinyar family, who played a significant role in the history of Zoroastrian manuscript production. This family lived in Kerman but had their roots in Khorasan. A certain Goped Shah Rostam Bunda Shahmardan Dinyar, who copied at least 2 Middle Persian manuscripts, is mentioned in a riwayat in 1512 among the group in Khorasan with his brother Dastu Bahram Rostam Shahmardan. In another letter, 5 years later, his name is mentioned again among the signatories after his brother, but it is not mentioned that from where this letter is sent. So we don't know whether they were still living in Khorasan or they had already moved to Kerman. His grandnephew, Marzban, son of Feridun, Marzban, Bahram, Rustam, Bunda, Shahmardan, Dinyar, also copied several important manuscripts, and his descendants were active in producing manuscripts for at least 7 decades. Marzban himself was forced to leave his home in Kerman and moved to Qazvin at the command of Shah Abbas, and he then moved to Khorasan for a short time and returned to Kerman and died there. This is a genealogy of Marzban family, who were descendants of the Dinyar family from Khorasan. As you can see, they copied several manuscripts. It's a huge contribution to manuscript production. And they're very important not just because of the number of manuscripts they copied, but because later scribes also copied from these manuscripts. And there's also another member. Here you can see that, for example, Mehraban Anushagurban, who is also a very famous scribe, copied many of his manuscripts from the ones of Marzban family. And another member of this family, but from another branch, Vehmard Feridun Vehmard, also copied liturgical Vishtas Vyasht, manuscript K4, in 1723 in Kerman. So I'm not going to bore you with all these names and numbers, it can go forever, but this is one significant example of a Khorasani family who moved to Kerman and had a noticeable impact on manuscript production. To conclude, this resettlement may not be the sole factor contributing to the increase in manuscript copying, but and other elements like political changes during the realm of Shah Abbas must be considered. But I think this phenomenon is something that cannot be denied. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that. Do we have any questions initially before we bring everybody else back up for Niloufar? Yes.
I have a tangential question. I wonder if you know of any center of book production in the south of the Kerman.
You mean
like
the
one we had in, like, let's say, Shiraz.
You mean the Zoroastrian manuscripts, or
Anything. I wonder if they have it, if they had like a separate center, or do we know where these manuscripts were produced in the first place?
Well, this was one of my questions initially. I couldn't find anything related to that in Yazdan Kerman, but Mahdi is here. Maybe she works on.
I'm not like generally about manuscripts, not necessarily. I think Zoroastrian manuscripts may have had different kind of setting for production, separate from Arabic and Persian manuscripts. But I'm also not aware of, perhaps there have been artistic workshops for illustrated manuscripts, but it's like separate from what
We don't know of, at least for Zoroastrians, we don't know of a certain place for copying manuscripts because they were so marginalized and they were basically poor. I mean, they couldn't have this. Living in marginal places and they were basically poor, so they couldn't have had these facilities to have a certain place for copying manuscripts.
Right, for the same reason, I'm thinking perhaps part of the, let's say, the ritualistic ceremony, the fire temple was devoted to this practice.
The practice of copying manuscripts. I don't think so because a fire temple is a sacred place and the process of copying manuscripts is not very much sacred, so I don't think so. Thank you.
Another question, maybe?
Yeah. Dear Angela, what very interesting paper, thank you. Can you tell me which texts were actually had gone through this transmission? Which texts, when you say Zoroastrian, what do you mean by that?
Well, mainly the Avesta manuscripts and mainly the liturgical parts, like the liturgical manuscripts, like Yasna, Vidavta, Tvisvara, those parts of Avesta that have instructions of how to do a ritual.
Well, maybe we can think about opening up the floor for all of our panelists and see if there's any more questions here as we come towards the end. I think there's, it might not have been so clear, but I think there were some interesting kind of, connections here about we start with this idea of what is Khorasan and how the movements of different people shape that, and then we think about how the arrival of Islam shapes the landscape and how, the movement of Zoroastrians out of Khorasan, right, so changes. I saw a hand with a question for someone. Question from Nilofa.
About Zoroastrians living in Mashhad after the Safavid period?
After what?
The Safavid period?
Well, no, because as you can see in the report of Nariman Hushan and other riwayats, there is no longer mentions of Zoroastrians living in Khorasan. By Mashhad, I don't know, you mean the city of Mashhad or?
There must have been, because the Jewish quarter in Mashhad was built on this, where the Zoroastrians lived before.
No, I think this wave of immigration was kind of a final immigration of maybe there were some Zoroastrians living in Mashhad in Khorasan, but because I work on manuscript production, I look at this as from that perspective.
Yeah.
And since no manuscripts were produced there, so I don't observe that.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, right? Because then it gets to, like, manuscripts are often tied to, like, maybe elite production. So you might see a removal of the religious elite, right? And then, well, the community itself is still there a little bit longer. Other questions for any of our presenters?
I have a question for Hannah and for about this ruler of the East, of the Al-Khan. I don't remember what it was about this. We should ask you. I mean, what would be your idea about this title? What East does he refer to? Because my speculative idea would be that would be to consider the Al-Khan as what is a part of the larger Hephthalite state, and then proceed and speculate that the Hephthalites and the other units would have had this division between Western and Eastern wings, and given that the Sogdians, for example, perceived that India is in the East, not on the south. For example, we see like the scout paintings. I don't know about the Bactrians, maybe the Bactrians also somehow perceive the Indians to the east, so maybe that would be the kind of explanation of this title, but I would like to hear.
So that's a difficult answer. We still really don't know, because the question is that the Al-Khans, that they're part of the, as you said, the larger Onish migration that HLNC talks about in his article. They were definitely settled here, for a long time, after the migration, you can see. And then when they go to the south, for me, of course, for other things, that basically the coin was minted to the north of the Hindu Kush, somewhere, to Kharistan, those areas. But my idea is that because you have the coins of Mihira Kula already, you have, for example, Khingila, the Shahis, you have the Brahmi, in the scripts, and you have Adoman. So if you put them chronologically, so of course, different people talk about these coins, whether they were really one after another, or they just adopted some elements from each other, as very common in the numismatic, you can see. But I see them later. So if you say if the Haftalites, the division is here, so you have the Al-Khans and the Haftalites in the north, we think a lot about Meham, for example, King Meham, of the one in the Bactrian documents. We thought that probably is the Meham of the south. The Al-Khan is the same, but now we know it's not the same. So there are two different Mehams. But then, what I think basically, so you have basically in succession, you have different kings. From the beginning, they didn't call themselves the king of Mirasan. So you see Atoman calls himself the king of Mirasan in the Bactrian documents. So very much to the south of Hindu Kush. So now, if you think that the guys, or they say the rest of the Haftalites are in the north, that they talk them, they think about them as the western one, that they position themselves as eastern to them, that I don't know, because the coins that they don't tell us. So they just say the lord of the east, the king of the east. And then the king, Tegin, is also the king of Khorasan, which is very clear, the term Khorasan is there, that they say the Persian. But it's really difficult to position that. And in the Bactrian one, of course, you always say east, south, and north, right? You always go this like basically clockwise in a way in the documents. But then that's a geographical indicator, not a political one. So, but this is on the coin of the king. It's quite clear that this is a like political basically legend that talks about a region, but we really don't know why they call it Mirasan. So I still think about it, that why they call it Mirasan. Why they just call simple Kablistan, or basically Zabristan, or say Pushkalabati, or these areas. But why Mirasan? So I have no answer for that yet. So the coins, whatever coins I saw so far, I tried to put all documents, whatever I found Bactrian, I saw, and then not all of them are here, by the way. So I tried to put them together, look at them chronologically, compare them together, but really not. I don't have an answer that why they did it. So, but then, of course, that region they talk about, we know that the Al-Khans, they went to India. There was a very famous sun temple in Kabul. June, the temple of June in Kabul, near Kabul. But then Al-Khan goes to India, they were defeated by the Qatars, they come back. And then what they do, they basically built a temple, which is in Khair Khana in Kabul today. It's called Khair Khana. So the Khane Sun, Khane Kushi. So that we have, but then it's really difficult to see in that sense. I really have no answer for that.
Nobody's guessed the question.
So I have a question for Hannah, Reza, and what's your name? Nirvar. Okay, there are too many Mer and Mirs for me to not ask this question, right? Your Zoroastrian texts were all written by people called, well, most of them called Mer-Rabban, yeah? And I am surprised that the first thing that you don't say is that Mirasan is the Mitra. I don't know the son, husband, the son,
John.
Right. So.
I was waiting for you to ask that. Expected that. Yes, that there are many Mehrabans among Zoroastrians, but I really don't know if it is related to Mithraism. I don't know. I have no answer for that.
Is the commonality of that name perhaps also indicative of the fact that you're looking at families and names stay within the family of scribes or something?
Well, yeah, generally there are certain names that are repeated, not among the scribes, but among the TDSHU.
Okay.
Yeah, there are many megagrams. Yeah. But if it's related to Mithraism or not, maybe.
So, do you want to answer for that?
From you guys? Well, if you have one.
A quick one, perhaps.
Sure.
Because, see, I mean, the name of Mir, I mean, in the east of the Bactrian one, you get Mir, usually.
Right.
And then you have lots of them. You have a document, and then you have a priest of Mir.
Right.
So, I mean, it talks a lot about your Mir, that when I come and see you, I fall on your head, and I bend to my knees, and I do the prostration sajda. It's called namaz gan. In the document, it's called namaz gan. So that's why we know the word namaz. In the Bactrian document, it's called namuz gan, sorry, in the pronunciation. So, in that sense. So you do get the Mir there. But then, it's like you also get of course, Afghan Khana and other places, when you have the King of Blue, for example. You have lots of sons here. That actually I'm going to write an article, the kings of the sun in this region, the east one.
Thank you.
So, but then, it's like you do have a lot of places, for example, in Bamyan, you have Mir on the top of Buddha's head. The relation, what is the relation between Buddha and the sun, right? And then, so you basically, you get it also on the Akhan coins, I didn't show them, but you really get the moon and the sun, so which is the divine kingship, the cosmic things, you get it there. So the sun is very much like that. But the only thing we don't know is that we don't have any specific site, like excavating, apart from Kharkhana, excavating it and know that this is really a place for the sun, temple, dedicated, made. That's something is still waiting. But otherwise, in terms of like name, places, we do a lot.
Yeah,
so just name needs for the future.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Mason missed your talk because, as you know,
he was here.
Yeah, he has excavated that was in May, right? So yeah.
I had to move because the mirror was blinding me over there.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a temple. Any other questions?
Is there a prosopography of the names of all the people who appear in your documents?
But I'm trying to make one. Hopefully. There was one made by Professor Cantera of the New family.
Well, you know the Zoroastrians co-opted man, right?
We have a question from Gershon.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for Reza as well. I listened to your talk also the other day, right, on the taxation fiscal administration. And that one, I'm also putting it in comparison with what you presented today. You talked about the organization of Khorasan and the Umayyads into a kind of you took all these cities, I'm paraphrasing, you said they took these cities and they organized them into Khorasan. And there too, you talked about the organization of fiscal administration. You put it under the fourth stage then, right, from 718 to 748, right? And do you put this in a similar time period, and are you seeing this as part of a larger line organization? I'm just curious of the broader context of what you're seeing when we're comparing these different regions and processes.
All right, thank you for your question. So basically that day was the Umayyad fiscal administration. So my argument was that without understanding the context, the region, already administrations were in place, we cannot, it's like futile, to talk about Umayyad administration. Because I showed you that they have Tog, had, Jizya, Kharaj, Barid, Qazi, all like basically similar in a way. So, and we know that based on Barfield's, basically definition of Arabs as the vanquishing empire, because he calls them vanquishing, but it's the large as part of the shadow empire, like the steppes. And now we know much more, and if you look at it from that perspective, many things opens to us to understand it. But then this one, basically, yes, I do put in a say long to understand it. That's why I brought the whole from the Achaemenids, like to say that there are three names. Of course, they were part of the Achaemenid period. I mean, Achaemenid say an empire, but you had a Bakhtri satrapy for Bakhtri, and then you have the Satrapi, but not yet unification in one region as one, say, person, and that happens later. So basically, I try to trace it, as go back, as to try to understand how it changes. But then going back to that, fiscal administration, then the Umayyads, have the Amir, they have the Amir, and then when the Sassanians, they have the Ispahat, and they have the Marzban. And then we can read the book of what is that? The book is in French family. It's in the administration of the region. Rika. So when you look at the Rika's Gizel's book, so then you can actually get the actual ceiling, and then see some places you get it. And also, what is his name? A Russian colleague, I forgot his name now. So he published, yes, exactly. He published an article on the Mihrab of Bach. So when we get all these basically things together, we put them together, we realize that there is a tradition. We used to recognize, and then we have the Umayyad one. And if you look, for example, in the Khurradabe, it says Khurasan as an arbaa, right? So Rubi this, and you look at back at Shahristaniyat and Shah, so it gives you almost a Khurani, it's like they put them together, they give you almost a kind of picture of what's happening. And of course, Rob's book. So if you look at the beginning of the introduction, it gives you basically that answer. Yeah, that's it.
Excuse me. Did you say what is the meaning of Khorasan?
Yes. So Khorasan in Pahlavi, there are two. See the Mughals, for example, the Mongols, like later, they used to, for example, Forsiyzabon says Khorasan Tanasan, means where your tan is Asan. But then, of course, it's the Mongol, like later, right? Forsiyzabon is a Timur period, because he has the geography of Khorasan. Apart from the book Majma' al-Tawarikh Sultani, so there's a Zubda to Sawarikh and also Majma' al-Tawarikh. So because he writes the connection, the continuation of the Rashid Din's one. So he talks at Tanasan, but then Khorasan, definitely Khalasan is the sun. This is what Asadi in his Fakhruddin talks about this. But then Mirasan definitely is also the place where the sun comes up.
Yes. I wanted to say actually, literally, it means the place where the sun rises.
Yes.
So in that case, maybe as Huar and Mer are two deities actually before Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, there are also two deities. Mer is the god that comes before. He's the god of the light, the shining that comes before the sun. And sun is, there are two different deities. And we have Mer Yash and we have Khorshid. We also have a Yash, different Yash for Khorshid, and we have a different Yash for Mer. And as you know that Mer has that chariot, which the chariot is because it comes before the actual sun appears in the sky. So, but in Farsi, we consider them almost as equal in our everyday dialect. But when we say, in practice, Khorshid and Mer almost connotate the same thing for people. So maybe in that case, Merasan and Khorasan is almost a kind of the same thing where sun comes up.
Yeah. Which I think we have Michael here has written a book, iconography of Iranian gods, deities basically. So and then he published the book. So we get the Kushan coins, and then you definitely get the Miro. The O is silent, so you don't need to read that one at the end of it. So Miro, and then he is holding his hands like you see the radiation. And then, so you have also Helios, which was the same standing like this. And then at the same time, you get the Helios on the coins of what is his name, the king? Plato. So the Greco-Bactrian, Aflatun, the Greco-Bactrian king. Also, you have the Helios with the chariots. And then that, we think that the iconography most probably, if you have an Iranian idea, the personification or anthropomorphism, which is happening basically based on the Greek, anthropomorphical model. So that takes it from there. But then, if you go back with the idea, that basically what that the Sasanian take this region, Kushan Shah, make it part of the Iran Shah. Then it's like as you say, it was like basically whether the question is that You bring this region under your administration, you basically bring, upper, say, levels into that to translate it, or you let the local, basically institution, continue in a larger, say, space. But I think very much you're right in this, that, the sustenance in a way gives the whole translation to what it was already there. So, and then the best evidence for that is Marsdal.
Well, I think we're just about out of time.
And
maybe this is a conversation we can carry out.
One question for you.
One question.
Basically, I had a half question for her. So I take the next one. So thanks a lot. You talked a lot about this Sharia, and I was actually going to continue what Rob said. Because the people who are basically building the building, like Rashid or the guys basically working on the Kumbh, or they are not definitely philosophers, right? So they do not have this kind of high idea. Maybe some of them would have, for example, but then the poet also, is a great philosopher, thinker. But then many of them would not. And this is basically more, like bringing it into a different kind of discussion. But what about the people who, my question is very this way. What about the real people who do build the building? Because these are the outer city and the houses writing about that, God this, that, blah, blah, blah. Like you have basically Tariq al-Khurasan, Tariq al-Ba'ad, Tariq al-Ba'ad, at the beginning, almost all of them the same stage. But then what about those people who actually would build? So,
regarding to the ordinary people, unfortunately, as all of you know, we don't have any specific material. What we have from the period is manuscripts, published books, and hopefully some buildings with lots of them were rolling, and with lots of intervention carried out. So what we have, first of all, we just have some manuscripts or text from the high-level class of the society. Okay? So we don't have any specific material first. Then, when we listen to the points of Joseph Fonas, for example, then he says that this discourse engage all of the people in the society, and no one even have this, everyone fear to be opposed to his thoughts or be opposed to them. It reveals something, and it's just a premise that maybe what the Italians said on that period, somehow echoing among people, not literally what they said, but in the form of story, in the form of some moral points, people would talk about it, and people make discussion about it. And probably these thoughts somehow conveyed to the ordinary people. I think that, and based on this, I want to say that maybe this thought somehow affect on that master builder that will be.
On that note, I think we should thank all of our presenters, and maybe we'll carry this conversation off to the banquet hall at the Hotel Uzbekistan. And thank you all for a great session and a great conference.
And thank you, Rob.
No.
Thank you.